How do you get your first internship when you don't have any previous corporate experience? For me, my first internship came through a very simple referral, a college friend. But getting the internship wasn't just about the referral. I had to go through multiple interview rounds, and honestly, I wasn't completely prepared for what they were going to ask. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I got my first internship after my second year, what happened in all the interview rounds, the mistakes I made, and what I learned from my very first interview experience. And I won't be revealing the startup's name or my hometown, but it was a startup in my hometown and it became my first corporate experience. So let me start from the beginning. This happened after my second year of college during my summer vacation in 2024. At that point, I was looking for my first internship. I didn't have any corporate experience yet. One of my college friends had already joined a startup in my hometown as an intern. He knew that I was also looking for an internship, so he referred me. He asked me to send my resume to the company on May 19th, and after that, I was contacted for an on site interview. My interview was scheduled for May 24th. This was actually my first ever interview, so I was definitely a little anxious. Since this was my first interview, my preparation was also very basic. I prepared a self introduction, revised some basic concepts of C programming, went through some basic DSA, and revised the projects that I had mentioned on my resume. I honestly didn't expect the interview to go very deep because this was just an internship interview, and that was one of the first lessons I learned. Even for internship interview, don't assume that they'll ask only basic questions. First round was with the MD and owner of the startup, and this round was quite different from what I expected. He wasn't just asking me questions to check whether I knew syntax or could solve coding problems. He was trying to understand how well I actually understood programming concepts. For example, one of the questions was about how a variable is handled in a programming language at the low level. He also asked me about the difference between Java and C. So these weren't questions where I could just remember a definition and say it. He was trying to understand whether I knew what was actually happening underneath. He also asked me about my short-term and long-term goals. And then he asked me about my hobbies. I wasn't really prepared for these HR type questions, because I had prepared mostly technical topics. When he suddenly asked me about my goals and hobbies, I stumbled a little. It wasn't a disaster, but I definitely wasn't as confident as I could have been. And that was another lesson for me. Prepare for HR and personal questions, even if you're applying for a technical internship. After that, I had my second round with the device team lead. This round was more technical. He asked me to code two relatively simple questions. After the coding questions, he asked me about data structures. Specifically, he asked whether I knew linked lists and queues. Since I had studied the basic DSA concepts in college, I was able to discuss them. This round was a good reminder that even for a startup internship, you should be comfortable with basic data structures. You don't necessarily need to know advanced competitive programming concepts for your first internship, but you should be able to explain and implement fundamentals. The third round was with the app team lead. This one was interesting because instead of giving me a simple DSA question, he gave me a situation and asked me to write code for it. I started solving it, but during the dry run, I realized that I had missed some conditions. So initially, my solution wasn't completely correct. But during the dry run, I caught those cases and then corrected my code. And I think this was actually one of the most useful parts of the interview for me. Because interviews aren't always about writing perfect code on your first attempt. Sometimes you make a mistake. What matters is whether you can debug your own thinking, identify what went wrong, and fix it. So when you're solving an interview problem, don't just write the code and immediately say you're done. Take a sample input, dry run it, think about edge cases, and check whether your assumptions actually hold. After those 3 rounds, I had one final round with the manager. This round was less about technical questions and more about whether I could actually be able to work during my internship. He asked me how many weeks of vacation I had. He asked whether I would be able to continue working even after my college vacation ended. He asked how many hours a day I could dedicate to the internship and whether I could come to the office during weekends later. So at this point, they were basically trying to understand my availability and commitment. After that round, they asked me to leave and said that they'll get back to me. And then came the part that I was obviously waiting for. The next day, I got a call from HR and they told me that I had been selected. They asked me to join on May 27th, 2024. I joined, and the next day, on May 28th, I signed my official offer letter. And that was it. I had officially started my first corporate experience. It might sound simple when I tell the story now, but at that point, it was a really big moment for me because this was my first ever interview and my first internship. Looking back, I did make a few mistakes during this process. The biggest one was actually very simple. I carried only one copy of my resume. Since this was my first interview, I didn't think about the fact that there could be multiple interviewers. The MD actually pointed this out to me and told me that I should have carried multiple copies. So if you're going for an on-site interview, especially when you know that there are going to be multiple rounds, carry multiple copies of your resume. Another mistake was that I actually prepared mostly for technical questions. I had prepared C basics, DSA, my projects and my introduction. But I hadn't really prepared for questions about my goals, hobbies, strengths, weaknesses or other HR type questions. So even though this was a technical internship interview, I would still recommend preparing for both technical and HR questions. If you are a student looking for your first internship, there are a few things I would take away from my experience. First, don't underestimate startups. For your first internship, a startup can be really good place to start because you may get the opportunity to work closely with the team and actually understand how things work. Second, don't depend only on college placements. Referrals can help a lot. In my case, I got this opportunity because my college friend referred me. Cold emailing can also work. And LinkedIn networking and reaching out to people can open opportunities that you may find through regular applications. And finally, don't wait until you think you're perfectly prepared. I definitely wasn't perfectly prepared for this interview. I was anxious, I made mistakes, and I stumbled on some questions, but I still got through it. So, if you're currently looking for your first internship, start applying, keep improving, and learn from every interview. So, that was the story of how I got my first internship after my second year of college. It was my first interview, my first corporate experience, and honestly, one of the experiences that helped me understand what working in the industry was actually like. I'm going to make separate videos about the internship itself, what I worked on, my roles and responsibilities, how long I worked there, the stipend, and what I learned. So, if you're interested in following that journey, I'll be sharing them in the upcoming videos. And after that, I'll also be sharing how my journey continued through my next internships, my experience at a bigger company, and eventually how I prepared and cracked a FANG company. If you're a student looking for internships or placement, I hope this video gives you some confidence that you don't need to have everything figured out before you start. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.